The letter arrived on a Thursday, tucked inside a thick corporate envelope that bore the seal of St. Catherine's Medical Center, the most prestigious hospital in the state. I was sitting in my small office at the Free Community Health Clinic of Oakland, the place my family called my charity job, the place they mocked when they thought I couldn't hear, the place where I had spent the last 8 years of my life serving patients who had nowhere else to go. The envelope was heavy, the paper thick, the kind of stationery that spoke of boardrooms and endowments and decisions that changed lives. I stared at it for a long moment, my coffee growing cold beside me, the morning light filtering through the dusty blinds. I didn't open it right away. I didn't need to. I already knew what it said. I had been waiting for this letter for 6 months, ever since the headhunter had called, ever since the interviews had begun, ever since I had walked through the marble halls of St. Catherine's and felt the weight of 100 years of history pressing down on me. I was being offered the position of Chief Executive Officer. The first woman, the first person of color, the first outsider to ever lead that institution. The hospital that had denied my father's cancer treatment. The hospital that had watched him die. My name is Dr. Ariana Chin. I am 38 years old, and I am the daughter of a man who should still be alive. My father, Samuel Chin, was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer when I was 26, a bright-eyed medical resident who believed that the system worked, that if you followed the rules, if you did everything right, the people who were supposed to help you would help you. I was wrong. We were all wrong. St. Catherine's denied his treatment not because it wasn't medically necessary, not because it wouldn't have saved his life, but because of a technicality. A paperwork error. A checkbox that had been left unfilled. An insurance code that didn't match the one on the form. My father died 3 months later, in a hospice bed, his hand in mine, his eyes searching for something I couldn't give him. I had spent the last 12 years trying to make sure that no one else's father died the same way. I had started at the bottom, working at free clinics, community health centers, places where the patients had no insurance and the staff had no resources and the system had no interest in helping. I had worked my way up, slowly, painfully, earning respect that was never given freely, building a reputation as someone who could fix what was broken, who could navigate the bureaucracy, who could fight for patients when no one else would. I had been offered jobs at prestigious hospitals before, positions that would have doubled my salary, tripled my profile, given me the recognition that my family had always said I didn't deserve. I had turned them all down, because I was waiting for this one. My family. The word itself was a knot in my chest, a tangle of love and resentment, of hope and disappointment, of the constant, grinding awareness that I would never be enough for them. My father had been the only one who believed in me, the only one who had seen the girl behind the grades, the woman behind the white coat. He had been a high school biology teacher, a man who had spent his life shaping young minds and dreaming of a future he would never see. My mother, a woman named Margaret who had married for security and been disappointed, had never understood why I wanted to be a doctor. "Why can't you do something practical?" she would ask, as if saving lives was not practical enough. My older brother, Marcus, a corporate lawyer who measured success by the size of his bonus and the number of his billable hours, had called my work at the free clinic a charity job, a phrase he deployed at every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every opportunity to remind me that I was the failure, the disappointment, the one who had not lived up to the family name. My younger sister, Chloe, had followed in Marcus's footsteps, working in marketing for a tech company, posting pictures of her vacations and her designer handbags on Instagram, living a life that was curated and filtered and utterly hollow. She had married a man who sold medical devices, a fact she never failed to mention when she wanted to remind me that she had married into the healthcare industry while I was still just a charity worker. They had all gathered at my father's funeral, dressed in black, performing grief the way they performed everything else. And then they had gone back to their lives, leaving me alone with the ashes of a man who had believed in me when no one else did. I opened the envelope. The letter was signed by the chairman of the board, a man named Harrison Vance who had been a surgeon at St. Catherine's for 40 years before retiring to the world of governance and power. His words were formal, precise. the language of a man who had written 1,000 such letters and had long since forgotten what it felt like to mean them. Dear Dr. Chen, it is my distinct pleasure to inform you that the Board of Directors of St. Catherine's Medical Center has unanimously approved your appointment as Chief Executive Officer, effective January 1st. Your vision, leadership, and commitment to equitable healthcare align perfectly with the values of our institution. We look forward to welcoming you to the St. Catherine's family. Sincerely, Harrison Vance, Chairman. I read the letter 3 times. The first time, I felt nothing. Just the cold, hollow emptiness that had been my companion for so many years, the emptiness that had settled into my chest the day my father died. The second time, I felt anger. Hot, burning anger at the institution that had denied him treatment, at the system that had failed him, at the family that had mocked me for trying to fix it. The third time, I felt something else. Something I hadn't expected. Determination. I picked up my phone and called my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice distracted, the way it always was when she was waiting for someone more important to call. Ariana. I was just thinking about you. I got the job, I said. The CEO position at St. Catherine's. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, the quick, shallow inhale and exhale of a woman who was trying to process something she hadn't expected. I thought that was a rumor, she said finally. Marcus said you didn't have a chance. He said they would never hire someone with your background. Marcus was wrong, I said. They hired me. Another pause. I could hear her thinking, calculating, trying to find the angle, the advantage, the way to turn my success into something that reflected well on her. Well, she said, her voice brightening, the way it always did when she saw an opportunity. That's wonderful news. We should celebrate. Dinner at the club. I'll invite everyone. I closed my eyes. I could see it already. The forced smiles, the hollow congratulations, the way they would talk about me when I wasn't listening. The way they had always talked about me. I'm not coming to dinner, Mom, I said. I'm not celebrating with people who spent the last 12 years telling me that my work didn't matter. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear the hurt in her silence, the way she had learned to weaponize it, the way she had used it to manipulate me for as long as I could remember. Ariana, that's not fair. We've always supported you. No, I said. You haven't. Marcus called my job a charity job at every family dinner for 8 years. Chloe posted about her husband's medical device sales while I was treating patients who couldn't afford insulin. And you told me I should have married a doctor instead of becoming one. I hung up before she could respond. I sat in my office, the letter still in my hand, the morning light now bright and unforgiving. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied, about the life that had been cut short. I thought about the hospital that had failed him, the hospital that was now asking me to lead it. And I thought about the family that had mocked me, the family that would soon learn exactly who I was. I picked up my phone again and called my assistant. Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day, I said. I have work to do. I spent the afternoon in my office, not seeing patients, not reviewing charts, but planning. St. Catherine's was a sleeping giant, an institution that had been resting on its reputation for too long. The quality of care had declined, the patient satisfaction scores had plummeted, the financials were a mess of inefficiency and waste. The board had hired me because they wanted a turnaround, because they needed someone who could fix what was broken, because they believed that an outsider with a background in community health could see what the insiders had missed. They were right. I could see it. I could see everything. I saw the departments that were overstaffed and underperforming. I saw the vendors who were overcharging and underdelivering. I saw the administrators who had been coasting for years, protected by tenure and connections and the inertia of an institution that had forgotten how to change. And I saw the policies that had denied my father's treatment, the same policies that were still denying treatment to thousands of patients every year. I was going to fix all of it. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted to prove my family wrong. But because my father deserved better. Because every patient deserved better. Because I had spent 12 years fighting for the invisible, the forgotten, the ones who had no one else to fight for them. And now I had the power to fight on a scale I had never imagined. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom of St. Catherine's Medical Center for the first time as CEO-elect. The room was everything I had expected: mahogany table, leather chairs, oil paintings of the men who had built the institution, all of them white, all of them male, all of them long dead. The board members sat around the table, watching me with the careful, assessing eyes of people who were trying to decide if I was worthy of the position they had given me. I took my seat at the head of the table, the seat that had been occupied by men in suits for over a century. I placed my folder on the polished wood, opened it to the first page, and looked up at the faces around me. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Dr. Ariana Chin. I am your new CEO. And I am here to tell you that everything you know about this hospital is wrong." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood pounding in my ears. I could see the shock on their faces, the way they had expected me to be grateful, humble, deferential. They had expected a woman who would nod and smile and play by their rules. They had hired the wrong person. "I'm not here to make friends," I said. "I'm here to save this institution. And saving it means changing it. From the ground up. Starting now." I spent the next hour walking them through my plan. The restructuring of administration. The renegotiation of vendor contracts. The overhaul of patient care protocols. The elimination of the policies that had denied treatment to thousands of patients, including my father. I didn't mention him. I didn't need to. His name was in every word I spoke, every number I cited, every change I proposed. When I finished, the room was silent. Harrison Vance, the chairman, looked at me with something I hadn't seen before. Respect. "Dr. Chin," he said. "That's ambitious." "I prefer the term necessary," I said. He nodded slowly. "The board will need time to review your proposals." "You have 2 weeks," I said. "I start on January 1st. On that day, I expect a signed authorization to implement every item on this list." I stood up, closed my folder, and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had said what I came to say. I had done what I came to do. And for the first time in 12 years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My phone buzzed as I walked through the marble lobby, past the fountain that had been there for 100 years, past the portrait of the founder who had built this place on the backs of patients like my father. A text from my brother Marcus. "Mom told me about the job. Congratulations. I guess even a broken clock is right twice a day." I stared at the screen for a long moment, the words burning in my chest. I thought about all the years I had tried to earn his respect, all the dinners where I had smiled through his insults, all the holidays where I had pretended that his words didn't hurt. I thought about the man who had called my life's work a charity job, the man who had never once asked about my patients, my research, my dreams. I typed a reply. "Thank you, Marcus. I'll remember that when I'm reviewing the contracts for your firm's medical malpractice cases." "Oh wait, I won't. Because I'm terminating them effective immediately." I hit send and put my phone away. I walked out of the hospital, into the bright winter sun, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt free. The 2 weeks between my presentation to the board and my first official day as CEO were the longest of my life. I spent them preparing, planning, building the foundation for the transformation that was about to begin. I met with department heads, reviewed financial statements, studied the hospital's operations with the intensity of a surgeon preparing for a complex procedure. I identified the inefficiencies, the redundancies, the policies that were costing lives and money. I built a team of advisors, people I had worked with over the years, people who shared my vision and my commitment to change. And I waited. My family, predictably, did not take my silence well. My mother called every day, leaving voicemails that alternated between pride and guilt, congratulations and recriminations. She wanted me to come to dinner, to celebrate, to let her show me off to her friends at the country club. She wanted to bask in the reflected glory of my success, the way she had always basked in Marcus's promotions and Chloe's wedding. I didn't return her calls. I didn't have time for performances. I had work to do. Marcus, stung by my text about his firm's contracts, had escalated his attacks. He sent a series of emails each one more condescending than the last, questioning my qualifications, my experience, my ability to lead an institution as prestigious as St. Catherine's. He copied our mother, our sister, his partners at the firm, as if he were building a case against me, as if he could intimidate me into backing down. I read each email once, then deleted it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The contracts were already being reviewed by the hospital's legal team. By the time I took office, Marcus's firm would be history. Chloe, ever the opportunist, had taken a different approach. She sent a series of texts, each one sweeter than the last, asking about my plans, my vision, my needs. She offered to help with marketing, with public relations, with the brand story of my new role. She wanted to leverage my success for her own career, to use my position to advance her standing in the tech world. I replied with a single sentence, "I'll let you know if I need anything." She didn't text back. The only person in my family who didn't reach out was my father. He couldn't. He was dead. And that, more than anything, was the fuel that kept me going. On December 28th, 3 days before I was set to take office, I received a call from Harrison Vance. His voice was different than I remembered it. Warmer. More human. "Dr. Chin," he said, "I've reviewed your proposals. The board has reviewed your proposals. We have some concerns." I sat in my office at the free clinic, the same office where I had received the letter, the same dusty blinds, the same cold coffee. What concerns? He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him breathing, the slow, steady rhythm of a man who was choosing his words carefully. "The scope of the changes you're proposing, it's unprecedented. The board is worried about the disruption, the pushback from the staff, the potential for backlash." I leaned back in my chair, the city spread out below me through the small window that faced the street. "Mr. Vance, with all due respect, the staff has been coasting for years. The disruption is necessary. The pushback is expected. And the backlash is coming whether we make these changes or not. The only question is whether we control it or it controls us." He was quiet again. I could hear him thinking, processing, trying to find a way to push back without sounding like he was defending the status quo. "I'm not asking you to trust me," I said. "I'm asking you to look at the data. The patient satisfaction scores. The financials. The mortality rates. This hospital is dying, Mr. Vance. And if we don't act now, there won't be anything left to save." He sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had been fighting the same battles for 40 years and was tired of fighting. "The board will approve your proposals," he said finally. "On one condition." "What condition?" "I want you to meet with the senior staff. The department heads. The ones who have been here the longest. I want you to hear their concerns. I want you to show them that you're not just an outsider coming in to tear down what they've built." I thought about the department heads, the men and women who had been running this hospital for decades, the ones who had allowed the policies that denied my father's treatment to continue. I thought about the meetings I would have to have, the conversations I would have to endure, the performances I would have to give. "I'll meet with them," I said. "But I'm not going to change my plans to make them comfortable." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I'm asking you to listen." I hung up and sat in my office for a long time, the city spread out below me, the weight of the years pressing down on me. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about the hospital that had failed him, the hospital that was now asking me to lead it. And I thought about the department heads, the people who had built the system that had killed him. I was going to meet with them. I was going to listen. And then I was going to do exactly what I had planned to do from the beginning. The first meeting was with Dr. Richard Holloway, the chief of surgery, a man who had been at St. Catherine's for 35 years and had the ego to match. He was tall, white-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of commanding presence that made residents tremble and patients trust. He met me in his office, a corner suite on the top floor of the surgical wing, with windows that overlooked the city and a desk that had belonged to his predecessor and his predecessor before that. "Dr. Chin," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "I've heard a lot about you." I sat in the chair across from his desk, my back straight, my eyes steady. "I've heard a lot about you as well, Dr. Holloway." He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm sure you have. I've been here a long time. I've seen a lot of administrators come and go. Most of them don't last. I'm not most administrators, I said. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the cold, assessing eyes of a man who had spent his life judging others and found most of them wanting. No, he said. I don't suppose you are. We talked for an hour. He told me about the department, the challenges, the successes. He told me about the staff, the residents, the patients. He told me about the budget cuts, the staffing shortages, the endless battles with administration. He told me about the things that worked and the things that didn't. And through it all, I listened. I took notes. I asked questions. I didn't argue. I didn't push back. I just listened. When he finished, he looked at me with something I hadn't expected. Curiosity. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different. Softer. Someone who would come in with a list of demands. Someone who would tell us how to do our jobs. Someone who didn't understand what it takes to run a department like this. I nodded slowly. I understand more than you think, Dr. Holloway. I understand that the policies you've been following for 35 years are outdated. I understand that the protocols you've been using are inefficient. I understand that the mortality rates in your department are higher than the national average and have been for years. His face tightened. It's the data, I said, cutting him off. I've reviewed it. Every case, every outcome, every variable. The data doesn't lie, Dr. Holloway. Your department is underperforming. And if you're not willing to change, then you're not the right person to lead it. The silence that followed was absolute. I could see the anger in his eyes, the pride, the defensiveness. But I could also see something else. Something that might have been recognition. What are you proposing? He asked finally. I'm proposing that we work together, I said. That we review the protocols, update the procedures, implement the changes that the data suggests. I'm not asking you to abandon everything you've built. I'm asking you to build something better. He stared at me for a long moment. I could see him thinking, processing, trying to find a way to resist. But there was no way. The data was clear. The need was urgent. And he knew it. I'll review your proposals, he said. I can't promise anything. That's all I'm asking, I said. I stood up, shook his hand, and walked out of his office. The next meeting was with Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, the chief of oncology, the woman who had been responsible for the department that had denied my father's treatment. She was younger than Holloway, in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She had built the oncology department from nothing, had fought for every resource, every grant, every piece of equipment. She was respected, feared, and, I suspected, exhausted. She met me in her office, a smaller room than Holloway's, with windows that faced the parking lot and walls covered in awards and certifications. She didn't offer me a seat. She didn't smile. She just stood behind her desk, her arms crossed, her eyes cold. I know why you're here, she said. I stood in the doorway, the weight of the years pressing down on me. I don't think you do. I know about your father, she said. I know about his case. I know about the denial. I know that you've been waiting for this moment for 12 years. I walked into the room and closed the door behind me. I stood in front of her desk, my eyes on hers, my voice steady. Then you know why I'm here. She nodded slowly. To destroy me. To destroy this department. To get revenge for a man who died because of a paperwork error. I shook my head. I'm not here to destroy anything, Dr. Okonkwo. I'm here to fix it. The paperwork error that killed my father was a symptom of a larger problem. A problem that you've been ignoring for years. Her face tightened. I've dedicated my life to this department. I've saved thousands of lives. You've also lost thousands, I said. And many of those losses were preventable. The data is clear. The protocols are outdated. The policies are inefficient. And the staff is burned out. She stared at me, her eyes wide, her mouth open. I could see the anger in her face, the fear, the defensiveness. But I could also see something else. Something that might have been relief. What do you want from me? She asked. I want you to help me fix it, I said. I want you to be part of the solution. I want you to use your expertise, your experience, your passion to build something better. Not for me. Not for my father. For the patients who are still alive. For the ones who are still fighting. She was quiet for a long moment. I could see her thinking, processing, trying to find a way to resist. But there was no way. The data was clear. The need was urgent. And she knew it. I'll review your proposals, she said finally. I can't promise anything. That's all I'm asking, I said. I walked out of her office and into the hallway, the weight of the years still pressing down on me, but lighter now. I had met with the department heads, had listened to their concerns, had shown them that I was not the enemy. I had done what Harris and Vance had asked. And now I was ready to do what I had come to do. On January 1st, I walked into the CEO's office for the first time. It was a corner suite on the top floor of the hospital, with windows that overlooked the city and a desk that had belonged to a dozen men before me. I sat in the chair, the leather cool against my back, and I looked out at the city spread out before me. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about the hospital that had failed him, the hospital that was now mine. And I thought about the work that lay ahead. I picked up the phone and called my mother. She answered on the first ring, her voice bright. Expectant. Ariana, I was just thinking about you. I start today, I said. The new CEO of St. Catherine's Medical Center. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing, the quick, shallow inhale and exhale of a woman who was trying to find the right words. I'm proud of you, she said finally. I know I don't say it enough. But I'm proud of you. I closed my eyes. I had waited my whole life to hear those words. And now that they were here, they felt like something. Not the weight I had been carrying, not the emptiness I had learned to live with. Something else. Something that might have been the beginning of healing. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. The first 100 days of my tenure as CEO of St. Catherine's Medical Center were the most grueling of my life. I had anticipated resistance. I had spent 12 years in healthcare, had seen how institutions fought to protect themselves, how people clung to the familiar even when the familiar was killing them. But the resistance I faced at St. Catherine's was something else entirely. It was not just pushback. It was war. The department heads, many of whom had smiled to my face during our initial meetings, had mobilized against me behind my back. They circulated petitions, called in favors, leveraged decades of relationships to build a coalition of opposition. They went to the board, to the donors, to the local media, painting me as an outsider who didn't understand the culture of the institution, who was trying to tear down what had taken a century to build. They questioned my qualifications, my experience, my motives. They dredged up my father's case, spinning it as evidence of my vendetta, proof that I was not acting in the best interests of the hospital, but seeking revenge for a personal grievance. I watched it all from my corner office, the city spread out below me, the weight of the years pressing down on my shoulders. I didn't respond to the attacks. I didn't defend myself in the press. I didn't engage with the rumors and the innuendo. I just kept working. Because I knew that the only thing that would silence my critics was results. And results took time. The first major battle was over the oncology department. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, the chief of oncology, had been the most vocal of my opponents, leveraging her reputation and her relationships to build a wall of resistance around her department. She had refused to implement the new protocols I had proposed, had continued to follow the outdated procedures that were costing lives. She had rallied her staff against me, turning the oncology wing into a fortress of defiance. I called her into my office on a Tuesday afternoon, the rain streaking down the windows, the city shrouded in gray. She sat across from me, her arms crossed, her eyes cold, her jaw set. Dr. Okonkwo, I said, I've reviewed the data from your department for the last quarter. The mortality rates have not improved. The patient satisfaction scores have declined. The staff turnover is at an all-time high. She didn't flinch. I'm aware of the numbers. Then you're also aware that the changes I've proposed would address each of these issues. The new protocols would reduce mortality by an estimated 15%. The updated procedures would improve patient satisfaction by 20%. The staffing initiatives would reduce turnover by half. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving mine. And I've told you that those changes are not feasible. They would disrupt the workflow, overwhelm the staff, and compromise the quality of care. The data says otherwise, I said. The data doesn't understand the reality of this department, she said. The data doesn't know the patients, the staff, the challenges we face every day. I stood up and walked to the window, the rain streaking down the glass, the city blurred and indistinct. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied because of a paperwork error. I thought about the thousands of patients who had died in this hospital, many of them because of outdated protocols and inefficient procedures. I thought about the staff who were burned out, the patients who were scared, the families who were grieving. Dr. Okonkwo, I said, turning back to face her, I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm not asking you to like me. I'm asking you to do your job. To put the patients first. To set aside your pride and your ego and your fear of change, and to do what is right. She stared at me for a long moment, her face unreadable. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the battle between her loyalty to the past and her duty to the future. I'll consider your proposals, she said finally. That's all I'm asking, I said. She stood up, walked to the door, and paused with her hand on the handle. She didn't turn around. My father died of cancer, she said, her voice quiet, almost inaudible. 20 years ago. In this hospital. I was a resident then. I watched him die because of a delay in treatment. A paperwork error. Just like your father. I was silent. I didn't know what to say. I had spent 12 years believing that Dr. Okonkwo was the enemy, that she was responsible for the policies that had killed my father. But she was not the enemy. She was a woman who had been broken by the same system that had broken me. I became a doctor because of him, she continued. I dedicated my life to this department because I wanted to make sure that no one else's father died the way mine did. But I failed. I got comfortable. I stopped fighting. I became part of the system instead of trying to change it. She turned to face me, her eyes wet, her face soft. I'm sorry, Dr. Chen. I'm sorry for the way I've treated you. I'm sorry for the resistance. I'm sorry for my part in the system that killed your father. I walked toward her, the distance between us shrinking, the weight of the years lifting. You don't need to apologize, I said. You just need to help me fix it. She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I will. I promise. We stood there for a moment, two women who had been broken by the same system, who were now standing together to change it. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like I was not alone. The weeks that followed were different. Dr. Okonkwo became my ally, not my enemy. She implemented the new protocols, updated the procedures, rallied her staff around the changes. The mortality rates began to drop. The patient satisfaction scores began to rise. The staff turnover began to slow. And the resistance, which had seemed so formidable, began to crumble. The other department heads, seeing the success in oncology, began to fall in line. Some of them embraced the changes enthusiastically, eager to be part of something new. Others accepted them grudgingly, unwilling to be left behind. A few continued to resist, clinging to the past, refusing to see that the future was already here. I dealt with each of them individually, with patience and persistence, giving them the time and space to come around. Some of them did. Some of them didn't. And those who didn't were replaced. The board, which had been watching my progress with cautious optimism, began to see the results they had been hoping for. The financials improved. The reputation of the hospital began to recover. The donors, who had been threatening to pull their funding, began to increase their commitments. Harrison Vance, the chairman, called me into his office for a private meeting. Dr. Chen, he said, his voice warm, almost fatherly. I wanted to congratulate you. The progress you've made in just a few months is remarkable. I sat across from him, the weight of the years still pressing down on me, but lighter now. Thank you, Mr. Vance. But the work is just beginning. He nodded slowly. I know. And I know it hasn't been easy. The resistance, the attacks, the personal toll. I want you to know that the board stands behind you. We made the right choice when we hired you. I looked at him, at this man who had been a surgeon for 40 years, who had seen the system from the inside, who had chosen me to lead his institution. "I appreciate that," I said. "But I didn't come here for your approval. I came here to save this hospital. And I will, whether the board stands behind me or not." He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes, the kind of smile that spoke of respect and recognition. "I know," he said. "That's why we hired you." I walked out of his office and into the hallway, the city spread out below me through the windows, the future waiting to be built. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about the hospital that had failed him, the hospital that was now mine. And I thought about the work that lay ahead. There was so much still to do. The emergency department was understaffed and overwhelmed. The surgical wing was outdated and inefficient. The administrative structure was bloated and bureaucratic. The financial systems were a mess of waste and fraud. And the culture of the institution, the deep-seated resistance to change, was still alive and well. But I had allies now. Dr. Okonkwo, who had been my enemy and was now my friend. Dr. Holloway, who had been skeptical and was now supportive. A growing number of department heads, staff members, and board members who believed in the vision and were willing to fight for it. And I had something else. I had hope. My family, predictably, had not been part of this journey. My mother still called, leaving voicemails that were increasingly desperate, increasingly guilt-ridden. She wanted to be part of my life, to share in my success, to bask in the reflected glory of my position. But I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I would ever be ready. The wounds were still too fresh, the memories too raw. Marcus had stopped sending his condescending emails after his firm's contracts were terminated. I heard through the grapevine that he had lost several major clients as a result, that his partnership was in jeopardy, that his marriage was on the rocks. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel anything. He had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. Chloe had stopped texting after I declined her offer to help with marketing. I saw her posts on Instagram occasionally, the curated images of a life that was hollow and empty. She was still married to her medical device salesman, still posting pictures of their vacations and their designer handbags. I didn't envy her. I didn't pity her. I just didn't care. The only person in my family who mattered was my father. And he was gone. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and negotiations, I walked through the halls of the hospital, the way I had walked through them as a medical resident, the way I had walked through them as a daughter visiting her dying father. I stopped at the oncology wing, at the room where he had spent his final days. It was empty now, the bed stripped, the machines silent. I stood in the doorway, the weight of the years pressing down on me, and I let myself remember. I remembered the way he had looked at me, his eyes full of love and fear, his hand gripping mine. I remembered the way he had whispered, "Don't give up, Ariana. Don't ever give up." I remembered the way the machines had beeped, the way the nurses had moved, the way the doctors had spoken in hushed tones outside the door. I remembered the moment when the beeping stopped, when the room went silent, when the man who had believed in me took his last breath. I stood there for a long time, the tears streaming down my face, the grief that I had been holding at bay for 12 years finally breaking through. I cried for my father, for the man who should still be alive. I cried for the patients who had died in this hospital, the families who had grieved in this hallway. I cried for the woman I had been, the woman who had been invisible, the woman who had fought so hard to be seen. And then I stopped crying. I wiped my eyes, straightened my back, and walked out of the oncology wing. I had work to do. There were patients to save, systems to change, a hospital to transform. My father was gone, but his legacy lived on in me. And I was going to make sure that no one else's father died the way he had died. The next morning, I called a meeting of the entire hospital staff. Every doctor, every nurse, every administrator, every support staff member. I stood in the main auditorium, the same auditorium where the board had introduced me as CEO, the same auditorium where generations of doctors had been trained. The room was full, hundreds of faces watching me, waiting to hear what I had to say. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Dr. Ariana Chin. I am your CEO. And I am here to tell you a story." The room was silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood pounding in my ears. I could see the faces in the crowd, some curious, some skeptical, some hostile. I didn't care. I was going to tell the truth. 12 years ago, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He was a high school biology teacher, a man who had spent his life shaping young minds and dreaming of a future he would never see. He came to this hospital for treatment. And he was denied. Not because the treatment wouldn't have saved his life. Not because it wasn't medically necessary. Because of a paperwork error. A checkbox that had been left unfilled. An insurance code that didn't match the one on the form. I paused, letting the words sink in. The room was still silent, the faces still watching. He died 3 months later. In a hospice bed. With his hand in mine. And I made a promise to him. I promised that I would spend the rest of my life fighting to make sure that no one else's father died the way he died. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, at the doctors and nurses and administrators who had been part of the system that had killed my father. I'm not here to blame anyone. I'm not here to seek revenge. I'm here to ask for your help. To change this hospital. To save the lives that are still being lost. To build something better together. I paused again, the weight of the years pressing down on me, but lighter now. I know that change is hard. I know that the past is comfortable. I know that it's easier to cling to the familiar than to embrace the unknown. But the familiar is killing us. The past is not a sanctuary. It's a graveyard. And if we don't change, we will all be buried in it. I stepped back from the podium, the silence in the room absolute. I had said what I came to say. I had told the truth. And now it was up to them. The applause started slowly, a few people in the front row, then a few more, then a wave that spread through the entire auditorium. The sound was overwhelming, a roar of approval and support and hope. I stood at the podium, the tears streaming down my face, and I let myself feel it. The recognition. The acceptance. The beginning of something new. The months following my address to the hospital staff were a whirlwind of activity, a blur of meetings and decisions and the slow, painstaking work of transforming an institution that had been frozen in time for decades. The speech had done what I had hoped it would do. It had broken the ice, shattered the resistance, opened the door to change. But breaking the ice was only the first step. Now I had to swim. The emergency department was my next priority. It was the front line of the hospital, the place where patients arrived at their most vulnerable, their most afraid, their most in need. And it was failing. Wait times were hours long, sometimes days. Patients were leaving without being seen, their conditions worsening, their trust in the system eroding. The staff was burned out, overwhelmed, demoralized. The department was a disaster, and it was costing lives. I called a meeting with the ED leadership team. They gathered in my office, a group of tired, defensive, battle-weary men and women who had been fighting the same losing battle for years. The chief, a woman named Dr. Sandra Okeke, had been at St. Catherine's for 20 years. She was respected, feared, and, I suspected, exhausted. Dr. Okeke, I said, I've reviewed the data from your department. The wait times are unacceptable. The patient satisfaction scores are abysmal. The staff turnover is at crisis levels. I need to know what's going on. She sat across from me, her arms crossed, her eyes guarded. You want to know what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. We're understaffed, underfunded, undervalued. We're expected to do more with less every year, and when we can't, we're blamed for the failure. I nodded slowly. I understand. But understanding doesn't fix the problem. We need solutions. She leaned forward, her voice rising. I've been asking for solutions for years. I've submitted proposals, requested resources, begged for help. And every time, I've been told there's no money, no staff, no capacity. So forgive me if I'm skeptical that you're going to be any different. I looked at her, at this woman who had been fighting for her department for 2 decades, who had watched her staff burn out and her patients suffer, who had been ignored and dismissed by administrators who didn't understand what she was facing. I saw myself in her. The frustration, the exhaustion, the determination to keep fighting even when the odds were impossible. I'm different, I said. Because I've been where you are. I've worked in free clinics, community health centers, places where the patients had no insurance and the staff had no resources. I know what it's like to fight for every dollar, every piece of equipment, every additional pair of hands. And I know that the system is broken. That's why I'm here. To fix it. She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine. I could see the skepticism, the wariness, the hope that she was trying to suppress. "What are you proposing?" she asked finally. "I'm proposing that we work together," I said. "That we review the data, identify the bottlenecks, and implement the changes that will make a difference. I'm not promising that it will be easy. I'm not promising that it will be quick. But I am promising that I will fight for you, for your staff, for your patients." She was quiet for a long time. I could see her thinking, processing, trying to find a reason to say no. But there was no reason. She had been waiting for someone to fight for her for 20 years. And now, finally, someone was here. "I'll work with you," she said finally. "But I need you to understand something. My staff is hanging by a thread. They've been let down too many times. They don't trust the administration. They don't trust that things will change. And I don't blame them." "I understand," I said. "That's why I'm not going to ask you to trust me. I'm going to ask you to watch. To see what I do. And to judge me by my actions, not my words." She nodded slowly. "That's fair." We spent the next 3 months overhauling the emergency department. I brought in consultants to analyze the workflow, identify the bottlenecks, and recommend changes. I reallocated resources from other departments, shifting funds and staff to where they were needed most. I implemented new protocols for triage, new procedures for patient flow, new systems for tracking outcomes. I met with the staff, listened to their concerns, addressed their frustrations. And slowly, incrementally, the numbers began to improve. Wait times dropped. Patient satisfaction scores rose. Staff turnover slowed. The emergency department, which had been the hospital's greatest liability, began to become one of its greatest assets. Dr. Okeke, who had been skeptical and defensive, became an ally and an advocate. She spoke at board meetings, at donor events, at press conferences, telling the story of the transformation, giving credit to her staff and to the leadership that had finally listened. "She's not like the others," she said to a reporter who was doing a profile on me. "She actually cares. She actually fights. She actually gets it." I read the article in my office. The city spread out below me, the weight of the years pressing down on my shoulders. I was not used to praise. I was not used to recognition. I had spent 12 years in the trenches, fighting for patients who had no one else to fight for them, and I had learned to find satisfaction in the work itself, not in the applause. But reading Dr. Okeke's words, seeing the impact of the changes we had made, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pride. The success in the emergency department had a ripple effect throughout the hospital. Other departments, which had been watching from the sidelines, began to embrace the changes. The surgical wing, which had been resistant under Dr. Holloway, began to implement new protocols for infection control and patient safety. The administrative structure, which had been bloated and bureaucratic, began to streamline and simplify. The financial systems, which had been a mess of waste and fraud, began to tighten and improve. The board, which had been cautiously optimistic, became openly supportive. Harrison Vance called me into his office for another private meeting, his face beaming, his hand extended. "Dr. Chin," he said, "I wanted to congratulate you. The progress you've made in just 6 months is nothing short of remarkable. The board is thrilled. The donors are thrilled. The community is thrilled." I shook his hand, the weight of the years still pressing down on me, but lighter now. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. But the work is far from over." He nodded slowly. "I know. And I know that the next phase will be even harder. But I have faith in you. We all do." I walked out of his office and into the hallway. The city spread out below me through the windows, the future waiting to be built. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about the hospital that had failed him, the hospital that was now mine. And I thought about the work that lay ahead. There was still so much to do. The outpatient clinics were underperforming. The mental health services were inadequate. The community outreach programs were non-existent. And the culture of the institution, the deep-seated resistance to change, was still alive and well in some corners. But I had allies now. Dr. Okeke, who had been skeptical and was now supportive. Dr. Okonkwo, who had been resistant and was now a partner. A growing number of department heads, staff members, and board members who believed in the vision and were willing to fight for it. And I had something else. I had momentum. My family, predictably, had not been part of this journey. My mother still called, leaving voicemails that were increasingly desperate, increasingly guilt-ridden. She had seen the articles, the profiles, the news coverage. She knew that I was succeeding, that I was making a name for myself, that I was becoming the woman my father had always believed I could be. And she wanted to be part of it. Ariana, she said, in a voicemail that I listened to on a Sunday afternoon, the rain streaking down my windows, the city shrouded in gray. I know you're busy. I know you don't have time for me. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. I just didn't know how to show it. I deleted the message without responding. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I would ever be ready. The wounds were still too fresh, the memories too raw. Marcus had stopped reaching out entirely. I heard through the grapevine that he had been asked to leave his firm, that the loss of the St. Catherine's contracts had been the final straw in a long pattern of underperformance. He was now working as a solo practitioner, struggling to build a practice from scratch, his ego bruised and his reputation in tatters. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel anything. Chloe had filed for divorce. I saw the announcement on Instagram, a carefully curated post that spoke of growing apart and new beginnings. The comments were filled with sympathy and support, but I knew the truth. Her husband had been cheating on her for years, and she had finally found out. I didn't reach out. I didn't offer condolences. I just scrolled past, the way I scrolled past everything else in her curated life. The only person in my family who mattered was my father. And he was gone. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and negotiations, I walked through the halls of the hospital, the way I had walked through them as a medical resident, the way I had walked through them as a daughter visiting her dying father. I stopped at the chapel, a small, quiet room tucked away in a corner of the hospital, where families went to pray and grieve and hope. I sat in the back row, the weight of the years pressing down on me, and I let myself think. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about the hospital that had failed him, the hospital that was now mine. I thought about the changes we had made, the lives we had saved, the progress we had achieved. And I thought about the work that lay ahead. There was still so much to do. But for the first time in 12 years, I felt like I was not alone. I had a team, a community, a purpose. I had the memory of my father, guiding me, pushing me, reminding me why I fought. And I had hope. I stood up and walked out of the chapel, into the hallway, into the hospital, into the future. The work was not done. It would never be done. But I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The 1-year anniversary of my tenure as CEO fell on a cold January morning, the kind of morning that reminded you that winter was not yet ready to release its grip. I stood at the window of my corner office, the city spread out below me in shades of gray and white, the hospital humming with the quiet energy of an institution that was finally, after years of stagnation, beginning to breathe. I had been at St. Catherine's for 12 months. 12 months of fighting, of pushing, of dragging an unwilling giant into the future. 12 months of victories and setbacks, of allies gained and enemies made, of progress that was measured in small increments and hard-won battles. The numbers told the story. Patient satisfaction scores had risen by 40%. Mortality rates had dropped by 18%. Staff turnover had been cut in half. The financials, which had been bleeding red ink for years, were finally in the black. The hospital was no longer dying. It was healing. But the numbers didn't tell the whole story. They didn't capture the late nights, the endless meetings, the conversations that stretched into hours and resolved nothing. They didn't capture the resistance, the sabotage, the quiet, persistent efforts of those who wanted to see me fail. They didn't capture the toll it had taken on my health, my relationships, my sanity. They didn't capture the moments when I had wanted to give up, when the weight of the years had pressed down on me so heavily that I couldn't breathe. I had not given up. I had kept fighting. Because that was what my father had taught me to do. Because that was what the patients deserved. Because that was who I was. The call from my mother came on a Saturday afternoon, when I was in my apartment, reading through the latest reports from the foundation I had started in my father's name. The Samuel Chin Foundation for Equitable Healthcare was my passion project, a way to honor his memory by fighting for the patients who were still being denied treatment, still being failed by the system, still being invisible. We had raised millions of dollars, funded research, supported community health centers, advocated for policy changes. It was the work I had been doing for 12 years, but now I had the resources to do it on a scale I had never imagined. "Ariana," my mother said, her voice different than I remembered it. Softer. More vulnerable. "I need to see you." I sat in my chair, the phone pressed to my ear, the city spread out below me. "I'm busy, Mom. I don't have time for it's about your father," she said. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." I was quiet for a moment, the weight of her words pressing down on me. My father had been gone for 13 years. What could she possibly have to tell me that she hadn't told me already? "What is it?" I asked. "Not over the phone," she said. "In person. Please, Ariana. I'm not asking as your mother. I'm asking as someone who is trying to make amends." I closed my eyes. I had spent 13 years running from this woman, from the pain she had caused, from the wounds she had inflicted. I had built a life that did not include her, a success that she could not touch, an identity that was not defined by her approval. But she was still my mother. And she was asking for something I had never been able to give her. A chance. "I'll come," I said. "Tomorrow. But I'm not promising anything." "Thank you," she said. "That's all I ask." I hung up and sat in my office for a long time, the city spread out below me, the weight of the years pressing down on my shoulders. I thought about my mother, about the woman who had spent her life chasing status and approval, who had never understood why I wanted to be a doctor, who had mocked my work and dismissed my dreams. I thought about the phone calls, the voicemails, the desperate attempts to claw her way back into my life. I thought about the possibility that she had changed, that the years had softened her, that she was finally, after all this time, ready to be the mother I had needed. I didn't know if I believed it. I didn't know if I ever could. But I was going to find out. I drove to my mother's house the next morning, the same house where I had grown up, the same house that had been the site of so many painful memories. The neighborhood was different now, older, more worn, but the house was the same. The same colonial facade, the same white shutters, the same front porch where I had sat as a girl, waiting for my father to come home. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked different than I remembered her. Older, yes, but also softer. The hard edges that had defined her for so long had been worn down by the years, by the grief, by the loneliness. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, nothing like the designer clothes she had worn when I was a child. She looked, for the first time in as long as I could remember, like a woman who had stopped performing. "Ariana," she said, her arms open, her eyes wet. "Mom," I said, and I walked into her arms. We stood there for a long time, holding each other, the way we should have held each other all those years ago, when I was a girl who needed her mother, and she was a woman who couldn't be there. I felt her tears on my cheek, her breath on my neck, her heart beating against mine. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt something I hadn't expected. Forgiveness. We sat in the living room, the same living room where I had sat as a child, watching television while my parents fought in the kitchen. The furniture was the same, the photographs were the same, but the energy was different. There was no tension, no anger, no blame. There was just the quiet presence of two women who had been through hell and were finally, after all these years, learning to be together. "I've been seeing a therapist," my mother said, her voice careful, her eyes on mine. "For the last 2 years. She's been helping me understand why I was the way I was. Why I couldn't see you. Why I couldn't love you the way you needed." I sat across from her, the weight of the years pressing down on me. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the floor. Because I was afraid. Afraid of being invisible. Afraid of being forgotten. Afraid that if I didn't hold on to the things that mattered to me, the status, the money, the approval, I would disappear. I looked at her, at this woman who had spent her life running from fear, who had made choices that hurt herself and everyone around her, who was only now, at the end of everything, learning to be brave. "I'm not here to judge you," I said. "I'm here to listen." She looked up, her eyes wet, her face soft. "Your father knew. He always knew. He tried to help me. He tried to show me that I was enough, that I didn't need the approval of strangers, that the only thing that mattered was the people who loved me. But I couldn't hear him. I was too scared. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about the years he had spent trying to hold our family together, trying to protect me from my mother's indifference, trying to make me believe that I was enough. "He loved you," I said. "He never stopped loving you." My mother nodded, the tears streaming down her face. "I know. And I failed him. I failed you. I failed everyone." I reached across the space between us and took her hand. It was thin and cold, the hand of a woman who had spent her life holding on to things that didn't matter and letting go of the things that did. "You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." She squeezed my hand, her fingers trembling. "I want to be part of your life, Ariana. Not the way I was before. Not as the woman who couldn't see you. As someone who is trying to be better. As someone who loves you." I looked at her, at this woman who had spent her life running from the truth, and I saw something I had never seen before. I saw a woman who was trying. A woman who was learning. A woman who was finally, after all these years, beginning to see. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that very much." We talked for a while longer, about her therapy, about her life, about the small, ordinary things that filled her days. She told me about the garden she was planting, the books she was reading, the friends she had made. I told her about the hospital, the foundation, the work I was doing. And when I stood up to leave, she hugged me tight, the way she should have hugged me all those years ago. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thank you for giving me a chance. Thank you for asking," I said. I drove back to the city, the windows down, the wind in my hair, the sun setting over the horizon. I thought about my mother, about the woman who was trying to change, about the possibility of a relationship that was not defined by the past. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the legacy he had left behind. And I thought about myself, about the woman I had become, about the woman I was still becoming. The next morning, I walked into the hospital with a new sense of purpose. The work was still there, the challenges were still there, the resistance was still there. But I was different. I was lighter. I was freer. I called a meeting of the senior leadership team, the department heads, the board members. I stood at the head of the table, the same table where I had sat on my first day, the same faces watching me, waiting to hear what I had to say. "I've been here for a year," I said. "And in that year, we've accomplished a lot. But the work is not done. It will never be done. Because healthcare is not a destination. It's a journey. And we're all on it together." I looked around the table, at the faces of the people who had fought beside me, who had resisted me, who had doubted me and supported me and challenged me. "I want to thank you," I said, "for the work you've done, for the sacrifices you've made, for the patience you've saved. And I want to ask you to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep believing that we can build something better." Harrison Vance, the chairman, stood up and raised his glass. "To Dr. Chin," he said. "To the woman who saved this hospital." The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing off the walls, filling the space with warmth and gratitude. I stood at the head of the table, the tears streaming down my face, and I let myself feel it. The recognition. The acceptance. The beginning of something new. The second year of my tenure as CEO brought challenges I had not anticipated. The easy victories were behind me, the low-hanging fruit had been harvested, the most obvious inefficiencies had been addressed, the most vocal opponents had been won over or pushed out. What remained was the hard work of transformation, the slow, grinding process of changing a culture that had been calcified for decades. The hospital was no longer dying, but it was not yet thriving. It was in that uncomfortable middle space, the space between what had been and what could be, where the work was hardest and the progress was slowest. I spent my days in meetings, in negotiations, in the endless, exhausting work of managing people and resources and egos. I spent my nights reviewing data, preparing reports, planning for the future. I had lost touch with my friends, neglected my health, pushed David to the edge of his patience. I was burning out, and I knew it. But I didn't know how to stop. The hospital needed me. The patients needed me. My father's memory needed me. The call from Marcus came on a Tuesday evening when I was in my office, reviewing the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. I hadn't spoken to him since the text exchange on my first day as CEO, the one where he had congratulated me with a backhanded compliment and I had responded by terminating his firm's contracts. I had heard through the grapevine that he was struggling, that his solo practice was barely surviving, that his marriage had ended in a bitter divorce. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel anything. "Ariana," he said, his voice different than I remembered it. Softer. Weaker. The voice of a man who had been humbled. "Marcus," I said. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him breathing, the slow, steady rhythm of a man who was trying to find the right words. "I need your help," he said finally. "I don't have anyone else to ask." I leaned back in my chair, the city spread out below me, the phone pressed to my ear. I thought about all the times I had needed his help, and he had turned away. The times I had asked for advice, for connections, for a foot in the door, and he had dismissed me with a wave of his hand. The times he had called my work a charity job, had mocked my dedication, had belittled my dreams. "What kind of help?" I asked. He was quiet again. I could hear him struggling, the pride warring with the desperation. "I have a medical issue," he said. "Something serious. I need to see a specialist. But I don't have insurance. I can't afford the treatment. I was hoping you could help me get into St. Catherine's." I closed my eyes. The irony was not lost on me. My brother, who had spent years mocking my work at the free clinic, who had called my dedication to equitable healthcare a waste of time, was now asking for the very thing I had dedicated my life to providing. He was asking for help. And I was the only one who could give it. "What's the diagnosis?" I asked. He told me. It was cancer. Stage 3. The same cancer that had killed our father. The same cancer that had been denied treatment because of a paperwork error. The same cancer that had sent me on the path that had led me here. I sat in my office, the city spread out below me, the weight of the years pressing down on my shoulders. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about my brother, about the years of cruelty and dismissal, about the pain he had caused. And I thought about the choice that was before me. I could say no. I could let him suffer the way I had suffered, the way my father had suffered. I could let him experience the same system that had failed us, the same indifference, the same cruelty. It would be justice. It would be what he deserved. But that was not who I was. That was not who my father had raised me to be. "I'll help you," I said. "I'll get you into the oncology department. I'll make sure you have the best care. But I need you to understand something, Marcus. This is not for you. This is for Dad. This is for the person I want to be, not the person you made me." He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear him crying, the soft, muffled sobs of a man who had spent his life hiding his feelings and was only now, at the end of everything, allowing himself to feel. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you, Ariana." I hung up and sat in my office for a long time, the city spread out below me, the weight of the years pressing down on my shoulders. I thought about my brother, about the man who had made my life hell, about the possibility of reconciliation, of healing, of something new growing from the ashes of what had been. I didn't know if I could forgive him. I didn't know if I would ever be able to forgive him. But I knew that I was not going to let him die the way my father had died. I was not going to let the system fail another member of my family. The next morning, I called Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, the chief of oncology. She answered on the first ring, her voice brisk, professional. "Dr. Chin, what can I do for you?" "I need a favor," I said. "A personal favor. My brother has cancer. Stage 3. The same cancer that killed my father. He needs treatment. He needs the best care we can offer." She was quiet for a moment. I could hear her thinking, processing, understanding the weight of what I was asking. "I'll take care of it," she said. "I'll make sure he gets the best. I promise." "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." I hung up and walked to the window. The city was spread out below me, the sun rising over the bay, the future waiting to be built. I thought about my brother, about the treatment he would receive, about the possibility that he might survive. I thought about my father, about the treatment that had been denied, about the life that had been cut short. And I thought about the system that had failed him, the system that I was now responsible for changing. I had spent 12 years fighting to make sure that no one else's father died the way mine had died. And now I was fighting to make sure that no one else's brother died that way either. The work was the same. The mission was the same. The only thing that had changed was me. Marcus came to the hospital the following week. I met him in the lobby, the same marble lobby where I had walked on my first day as CEO, the same fountain, the same portrait of the founder. He looked different than I remembered him. Thinner. Paler. The arrogance that had defined him for so long was gone, replaced by something softer, something that might have been fear. "Ariana," he said, his voice tentative, his eyes searching mine. "Marcus," I said. We stood there for a moment, brother and sister, the distance between us measured not in feet, but in years of pain and silence and missed opportunities. "Thank you for doing this," he said. "I know I don't deserve it." "You're right," I said. "You don't. But that's not why I'm doing it." He nodded slowly, his eyes wet. "I know. You're doing it because you're a better person than I am." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. He was right. I was better. Not because I was born that way, but because I had chosen to be. Because I had learned, through years of struggle and sacrifice, that the only thing that mattered was the work. The patients. The lives that could be saved. I walked him to the oncology wing, the same wing where my father had spent his final days, the same wing that was now being transformed under Dr. Okonkwo's leadership. The halls were brighter now, the walls painted in warm colors, the nurses smiling, the patients hopeful. It was not the same place it had been 13 years ago. It was better. It was what it should have been all along. Dr. Okonkwo met us at the door. She shook Marcus's hand, her grip firm, her eyes kind. "Mr. Chin, I've reviewed your case. We're going to take good care of you." Marcus nodded, his face pale, his hands trembling. "Thank you, Dr. Okonkwo. I appreciate it." She looked at me, a question in her eyes. I nodded. She understood. "I'll take it from here," she said. "You can wait in my office if you'd like." I watched as she led Marcus down the hall, into the treatment area, into the future. I stood there for a long moment, the weight of the years pressing down on me, and I thought about my father. About the man who had believed in me. About the treatment that had been denied. About the life that had been cut short. I walked to Dr. Okonkwo's office and sat in the chair where I had sat on my first visit, the chair where I had confronted her about the policies that had killed my father. The room was different now. The walls were lined with awards and certifications, but there were also photographs. Photographs of patients who had survived, of families who had been reunited, of lives that had been saved. It was a room that spoke of hope, not of failure. I sat there for a long time, waiting, thinking, remembering. And when Dr. Okonkwo finally returned, her face was different. Softer. More hopeful. "He's going to be okay," she said. "The treatment is aggressive, but we caught it in time. He has a good chance." I closed my eyes, the tears streaming down my face. I had not realized how much I needed to hear those words. How much I had been holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the system to fail another member of my family. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for everything." She sat down across from me, her eyes on mine. "You don't need to thank me, Dr. Chen. You're the one who made this possible. You're the one who changed this place. You're the one who gave us the tools and the resources and the courage to do what we were always meant to do." I shook my head. "I just opened the door. You walked through it." She smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes, the kind of smile that spoke of partnership and respect. "We walked through it together. I stayed at the hospital for the rest of the day, checking in on Marcus, meeting with department heads, reviewing the latest data. The work was still there, the challenges were still there, the resistance was still there. But I was different. I was lighter. I was freer. That evening, I drove to my mother's house. She was in the garden, planting tulips for the spring, the soil warm under her fingers, the sun soft on her face. She looked up when I arrived, her smile wide, her eyes bright. "Ariana, I wasn't expecting you. I need to talk to you," I said. "About Marcus. About Dad. About us." She stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, her face suddenly serious. "What's wrong?" I told her about Marcus's diagnosis, about the treatment, about the prognosis. I told her about the decisions I had made, the help I had offered, the forgiveness I was trying to find. I told her about the hospital, the foundation, the work I was doing. And I told her about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the legacy he had left behind. She listened without interrupting, her eyes on mine, her hands clasped in her lap. And when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. "I know I don't say it enough, but I'm proud of the woman you've become." I looked at her, at this woman who had spent her life running from fear, who was only now, at the end of everything, learning to be brave. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." She reached across the space between us and took my hand. "I want to help. With the foundation. With the hospital. With whatever you need. I want to be part of something that matters." I squeezed her hand, the hand that had never held mine, the hand that had pushed me away. But I held it now and I didn't let go. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that very much." We sat in the garden as the sun set, the sky streaked with red and gold, the world quiet and still. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The third year of my tenure as CEO brought a different kind of challenge. The hospital was stable now, the financials were healthy, the patient outcomes were improving. The crisis had passed. But in the absence of crisis, something else had emerged: complacency. The staff, who had been energized by the transformation, were beginning to settle into comfortable routines. The department heads, who had been pushed to innovate, were starting to resist further changes. The board, who had been supportive of my aggressive agenda, were beginning to question whether the pace of change was still necessary. I understood their perspective. They were tired. They had worked hard. They wanted to rest. But rest was not an option. Because the healthcare system was not static. It was constantly evolving, constantly changing, constantly demanding more. If we stopped improving, we would start declining. And decline in healthcare meant death. I spent my days fighting the complacency, pushing the staff, challenging the department heads, reminding the board that the work was never done. I introduced new initiatives, launched new programs, set new goals. I brought in outside experts to train the staff, to share best practices, to shake them out of their routines. I visited other hospitals, other health systems, learning from their successes and their failures. I was tireless, relentless, unstoppable. And I was burning out. The call from Chloe came on a Sunday afternoon when I was in my apartment, trying to rest for the first time in weeks. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce, since she had stopped posting on Instagram, since she had disappeared from the curated life she had built. Her voice was different than I remembered it. Softer. More vulnerable. The voice of a woman who had been humbled. "Ariana," she said. "I need to see you." I sat in my chair, the city spread out below me, the phone pressed to my ear. "What's wrong?" She was quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing, the quick, shallow inhale and exhale of a woman who was trying to find the words. "I'm in trouble," she said. "Financial trouble. The divorce cleaned me out. I lost the house, the car, everything. I've been living in a shelter for the last 2 months. I didn't know who else to call." I closed my eyes. My sister, the princess, the one who had everything handed to her, the one who had mocked my work and dismissed my dreams, was living in a shelter. The irony was not lost on me. "What do you need?" I asked. "I need a job," she said. "Any job. I don't care what it is. I just need to get back on my feet." I thought about my sister, about the years of cruelty and dismissal, about the pain she had caused. I thought about the woman who had posted pictures of her designer handbags while I was treating patients who couldn't afford insulin. I thought about the choice that was before me. I could say no. I could let her suffer the way I had suffered, the way she had made me suffer. I could let her experience the same indifference, the same cruelty. It would be justice. It would be what she deserved. But that was not who I was. That was not who my father had raised me to be. I'll see what I can do, I said. I can't promise anything. Thank you, she said. Thank you, Ariana. I hung up and sat in my office for a long time, the city spread out below me, the weight of the years pressing down on my shoulders. I thought about my sister, about the woman who had made my life hell, about the possibility of reconciliation, of healing, of something new growing from the ashes of what had been. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I would ever be able to forgive her. But I knew that I was not going to let her starve. I was not going to let the system fail another member of my family. The next morning, I called the head of HR at the hospital. I need a favor, I said. A personal favor. My sister needs a job. Entry level. Anything you have. The head of HR, a woman named Denise who had been with the hospital for 20 years, didn't ask questions. I'll see what I can do, she said. I'll get back to you by the end of the day. She called back that afternoon. There was an opening in the patient registration department. It was entry-level, minimum wage, no benefits. It was perfect. Tell her to come in tomorrow, I said. I'll make sure she's taken care of. I hung up and walked to the window. The city was spread out below me, the sun setting over the bay, the future waiting to be built. I thought about my sister, about the job she would start, about the possibility that she might find her way. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the legacy he had left behind. And I thought about the system that had failed him, the system that I was now responsible for changing. I had spent 13 years fighting to make sure that no one else's father died the way mine had died. And now I was fighting to make sure that no one else's sister ended up in a shelter. The work was the same. The mission was the same. The only thing that had changed was me. Chloe came to the hospital the next morning. I met her in the lobby, the same marble lobby where I had met Marcus, the same fountain, the same portrait of the founder. She looked different than I remembered her. Thinner. Paler. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple blouse and jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, her face bare of makeup. She looked, for the first time in as long as I could remember, like a woman who had stopped performing. Ariana, she said, her voice tentative, her eyes searching mine. Chloe, I said. We stood there for a moment, sister and sister, the distance between us measured not in feet but in years of pain and silence and missed opportunities. Thank you for doing this, she said. I know I don't deserve it. You're right, I said. You don't. But that's not why I'm doing it. She nodded slowly, her eyes wet. I know. You're doing it because you're a better person than I am. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She was right. I was better. Not because I was born that way, but because I had chosen to be. Because I had learned, through years of struggle and sacrifice, that the only thing that mattered was the work. The patients. The lives that could be saved. I walked her to the patient registration department, a small office on the first floor, tucked away from the main traffic. The staff greeted her warmly, showing her to her desk, explaining her duties. She listened carefully, nodded at the right moments, asked the right questions. She looked scared, but she also looked determined. She looked like someone who was ready to fight. I left her there and walked back to my office. The work was still there, the challenges were still there, the complacency was still there. But I was different. I was lighter. I was freer. Over the next few weeks, I watched my sister transform. She arrived early, stayed late, worked harder than anyone else in the department. She learned the systems, mastered the protocols, earned the respect of her colleagues. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for special treatment. She just worked. And slowly, incrementally, she began to heal. I saw her in the hallways sometimes, and we would nod, exchange a few words, continue on our way. It was not the relationship I had dreamed of as a child. It was not the sisterhood I had seen in movies and read about in books. It was something more fragile, more tentative, more real. And it was enough. Marcus's treatment was progressing. Dr. Okonkwo called me weekly with updates, her voice cautiously optimistic. The tumors were shrinking. The side effects were manageable. He was responding better than expected. He might, she said, actually survive. I visited him in the oncology wing, the same wing where my father had spent his final days, the same wing that was now a place of hope instead of despair. He was sitting in a chair by the window, a blanket over his legs, a book in his hands. He looked up when I walked in, his face pale, his eyes tired, but his smile genuine. "Ariana," he said. "I was hoping you'd come." I sat in the chair beside him, the weight of the years pressing down on me. "How are you feeling?" He shrugged, a gesture that was so familiar, so Marcus, that it almost made me laugh. "I've been better. I've been worse. Dr. Okonkwo says I'm making progress." "She's the best," I said. "You're in good hands." He nodded slowly, his eyes on mine. I know I am. And I know I owe it to you." I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything, Marcus. You just need to focus on getting better." He was quiet for a moment. I could see him thinking, processing, trying to find the words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "About the past. About the way I treated you. About the things I said." I waited. There was more. I could hear it in his voice, the words he had been practicing, the apology he had been rehearsing. "I'm sorry, Ariana," he said. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I'm sorry for calling your work a charity job. I'm sorry for dismissing your dreams. I'm sorry for being the brother you didn't deserve." I closed my eyes. I had waited my whole life to hear those words. And now that they were here, they felt like something. Not the weight I had been carrying, not the emptiness I had learned to live with. Something else. Something that might have been the beginning of forgiveness. "I know," I said. "I know you're sorry." He reached across the space between us and took my hand. His hand was thin and cold, the hand of a man who had been fighting for his life. But it was the hand of my brother. The boy who had taught me to ride a bike. The teenager who had driven me to school. The man who had made my life hell and was now, at the end of everything, trying to make it right. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. But I know that I'm not going to spend the rest of my life carrying the weight of what you did. I'm not going to let your choices define me." He squeezed my hand, his eyes wet. I know you won't." We sat there for a long time, brother and sister, holding hands, the silence between us no longer a wall but a bridge. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like we were building something. Not a family. Not a legacy. Something smaller. Something more fragile. Something that might, if we were lucky, become a relationship. I left the oncology wing and walked through the hospital, the way I had walked through it as a medical resident, the way I had walked through it as a daughter visiting her dying father. The halls were busy now, filled with patients and families and staff, all of them moving with purpose, all of them part of the life of the institution. I had built this. Not alone, not single-handedly, but with the help of hundreds of people who had believed in the vision and were willing to fight for it. I stopped at the chapel, the same small, quiet room where I had sat on the night of my father's death. It was empty now, the candles flickering, the silence profound. I sat in the back row, the weight of the years pressing down on me, and I let myself think. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about my mother, about the woman who was learning to be present, about the garden she was planting, about the book club she had joined. I thought about my brother, about the man who was fighting for his life, about the apology he had offered, about the possibility of forgiveness. I thought about my sister, about the woman who was working in patient registration, about the transformation she was undergoing, about the hope that was growing in her eyes. And I thought about myself. The woman I had been. The woman I was becoming. The woman who had finally, after all these years, found her way home. The 4th year of my tenure as CEO brought a reckoning I had not anticipated. The hospital was thriving, the foundation was growing, my family was healing. On the surface, everything was perfect. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. I was tired. Not the tiredness of long hours and hard work, but something deeper. Something that felt like the accumulation of decades of fighting, of pushing, of carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I had been running for so long that I had forgotten how to stop. I had been fighting for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be at peace. I had been carrying the weight of my father's death for so long that I had forgotten that he would have wanted me to live. The signs were there, but I ignored them. The headaches that wouldn't go away. The insomnia that left me staring at the ceiling for hours. The shortness of breath, the chest pain, the feeling that something was wrong. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it would pass. I told myself that I didn't have time to be sick. David was the one who finally forced me to stop. He found me in my office at midnight, hunched over my desk, reviewing the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. My hands were shaking, my face was pale, my eyes were bloodshot. He took one look at me and knew. "When was the last time you saw a doctor?" he asked. I waved my hand dismissively. "I'm fine. I just need to finish this." He walked around the desk, took the papers from my hands, and pulled me to my feet. "You're not fine. You're not fine, and you know it. You're going to the emergency room. Now." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that I didn't have time, that the hospital needed me, that the work couldn't wait. But the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. I wasn't fine. I hadn't been fine for a long time. The emergency room was busy, the way it always was on a Saturday night. Dr. Sandra Okeke, the chief of the ED, saw me come in and rushed over, her face tight with concern. "Dr. Chin? What's wrong?" I shook my head, embarrassed. "It's nothing. I just need to." David put his hand on my shoulder. "She needs to be checked out. She's been having chest pain, shortness of breath, headaches. She won't listen to me." Dr. Okeke nodded, her expression serious. "I'll take care of her. Come with me." She led me to a private exam room, the same kind of room where I had treated thousands of patients over the years. She took my vitals, listened to my heart, asked me questions. Her face, when she was done, was not reassuring. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high. Your heart rate is elevated. I'm seeing some irregularities in your EKG. I want to admit you for observation. Overnight, at least." I shook my head. "I can't. I have meetings tomorrow." "I have Dr. Chin," she said, her voice firm. "You can't help anyone if you're dead. You need to take care of yourself. You need to let us take care of you." I looked at her, at this woman who had been my ally, my partner, my friend. I saw the concern in her eyes, the fear, the love. And I realized that she was right. I had spent my whole life taking care of others. I had never learned how to let others take care of me. "Okay," I said. "Okay." They admitted me to a private room on the top floor, the same floor where my father had spent his final days. The irony was not lost on me. I lay in the bed, the sheets crisp and white, the machines beeping softly, the city spread out below me through the window. David sat in the chair beside me, holding my hand, his face pale with worry. "You scared me," he said. "Don't ever do that again." I squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I didn't know." He shook his head. "That's the problem. You never realize. You never stop. You never let anyone help you." I closed my eyes. He was right. I had been running for so long that I had forgotten how to stop. I had been fighting for so long that I had forgotten how to rest. I had been carrying the weight of my father's death for so long that I had forgotten that he would have wanted me to live. The tests came back the next morning. No heart attack. No stroke. No permanent damage. But the warning signs were clear. I was on the path to a major cardiac event if I didn't change my ways. The doctors recommended rest, reduced stress, lifestyle changes. They recommended therapy. They recommended that I learn to let go. I lay in the hospital bed, the city spread out below me, the weight of the years pressing down on my shoulders. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about the hospital that had failed him, the hospital that was now mine. I thought about the work I had done, the lives I had saved, the changes I had made. And I thought about the cost. The toll it had taken on my health, my relationships, my sanity. My mother came to visit that afternoon. She walked into the room, her face pale, her eyes red. She sat in the chair beside my bed and took my hand. I was so scared, she said. When David called, I thought I was going to lose you. I looked at her, at this woman who had spent her life running from fear, who was only now, at the end of everything, learning to be brave. I'm okay, Mom. I'm going to be okay. She shook her head. You're not okay. You've never been okay. You've been running for so long that you forgot how to stop. I closed my eyes. She was right. They were all right. I had been running. Running from my father's death, from my mother's indifference, from my siblings' cruelty. Running from the pain, the grief, the fear. Running so fast and so far that I had forgotten who I was without the running. I don't know how to stop, I said. I don't know how to be still. She squeezed my hand. You learn. One day at a time. One moment at a time. You learn to breathe. You learn to rest. You learn to let others help you. I opened my eyes. She was crying, the tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling too. The kind of smile that reached her eyes, the kind of smile that spoke of hope. I'm going to help you, she said. I'm going to be here. I'm going to help you learn. I looked at her, at this woman who had spent her life pushing me away, who was now reaching out. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Thank you, I said. Thank you for being here. She leaned over and kissed my forehead, the way she should have kissed me all those years ago, when I was a girl who needed her mother, and she was a woman who couldn't be there. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I promise. Marcus came to visit that evening. He was still in treatment, still fighting, but he looked better than he had in months. His color was returning, his energy was improving, his prognosis was hopeful. He sat in the chair beside my bed, his eyes on mine. You scared me, he said. Don't ever do that again. I smiled, a weak smile, but a smile nonetheless. That's what David said. He nodded slowly. Great minds think alike. We sat in silence for a moment, the machines beeping softly, the city spread out below us. I thought about all the years we had wasted, the fights we had fought, the wounds we had inflicted. I thought about the possibility of something new, something different, something better. I've been thinking, he said. About Dad. About the way he died. About the way I treated you. I waited. There was more. I could hear it in his voice, the words he had been practicing, the apology he had already given but wanted to give again. I'm sorry, Ariana. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for being the brother you didn't deserve. I reached across the space between us and took his hand. His hand was warmer now, stronger, the hand of a man who was fighting for his life and winning. I know, I said. I know you're sorry. He squeezed my hand, his eyes wet. I'm going to be better. I'm going to try. I'm going to be the brother you deserved. I looked at him, at this man who had made my life hell, who was now, at the end of everything, trying to make it right. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. I'd like that, I said. I'd like that very much. Chloe came to visit the next morning. She was wearing her patient registration uniform, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her face bare of makeup. She looked tired, but she also looked happy. She looked like someone who had found her purpose. You scared me, she said, sitting in the chair beside my bed. Don't ever do that again. I laughed, the first real laugh I had laughed in months. That's what everyone says. She smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes, the kind of smile that spoke of transformation. Maybe you should listen. I looked at her, at this woman who had spent her life performing, who was now, at the end of everything, learning to be real. Maybe I should. We sat in silence for a moment, the machines beeping softly, the city spread out below us. I thought about all the years we had wasted, the competitions we had fought, the wounds we had inflicted. I thought about the possibility of something new, something different, something better. I've been thinking, she said, about the foundation. The Samuel Chin Foundation. I want to help. I want to be part of something that matters. I looked at her, at this woman who had spent her life chasing status and approval, who was now, at the end of everything, chasing meaning. I'd like that, I said. I'd like that very much. She reached across the space between us and took my hand. Her hand was warm, steady, the hand of a woman who had found her way. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I squeezed her hand. I never gave up. I just had to learn to let go. I was discharged from the hospital 3 days later. The doctors had cleared me to return to work, but with strict instructions to rest, to reduce my stress, to let others help me. I promised them I would try. I promised David I would try. I promised myself I would try. The first thing I did when I got back to my office was to call a meeting of the senior leadership team. I stood at the head of the table, the same table where I had sat on my first day, the same faces watching me, waiting to hear what I had to say. "I've been thinking," I said, "about the hospital, about the work we've done, about the work that's left to do." They waited. I could see the concern in their eyes, the fear, the love. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, "but I need to make some changes. I need to delegate more. I need to trust you more. I need to let go." Harrison Vance, the chairman, nodded slowly. "We've been telling you that for years." I smiled. "I know. I'm a slow learner." The room laughed, the tension breaking, the energy shifting. I looked around at the faces of the people who had fought beside me, who had resisted me, who had doubted me and supported me and challenged me. I saw Dr. Okeke, who had been skeptical and was now a partner. I saw Dr. Okonkwo, who had been resistant and was now a friend. I saw Dr. Holloway, who had been hostile and was now an ally. I saw the board members, the department heads, the staff. I saw the people who had made the transformation possible. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for carrying the weight when I couldn't. Thank you for believing in the vision. Thank you for being here." They applauded, the sound echoing off the walls, filling the space with warmth and gratitude. I stood at the head of the table, the tears streaming down my face, and I let myself feel it. The recognition, the acceptance, the love. The 5th year of my tenure as CEO was the year I finally learned to stop running. Not because I had nothing left to fight for, there was always more to fight for, more patients to save, more systems to change, more barriers to break. But because I had finally learned that running was not the same as leading. That exhaustion was not the same as dedication. That burning out was not a badge of honor, it was a warning sign I had ignored for far too long. I stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the hospital, not completely, but enough. I delegated more, trusted more, let go more. I hired a chief operating officer, a woman named Michelle Park who had been running a hospital system in Chicago and was looking for a new challenge. She was brilliant, driven, and utterly fearless. Everything I had been before the burnout had caught up with me. I gave her the authority to make decisions, to implement changes, to lead the staff. And I watched, from a distance, as she took the hospital to heights I had never imagined. The transformation continued. Patient outcomes improved. Staff satisfaction soared. The hospital was recognized nationally for its innovations in equitable care. We were written up in medical journals, featured on news programs, held up as a model for what healthcare could be. I accepted the accolades graciously, but I knew that the credit belonged to the team, not to me. I had opened the door. They had walked through it. And now they were building a future I could never have imagined. The foundation continued to grow as well. My mother, who had become an active volunteer, was now running the day-to-day operations. She had found her purpose, her passion, her reason for getting up in the morning. She traveled to community health centers around the country, meeting with patients and staff, learning about the challenges they faced, advocating for the resources they needed. She was good at it, better than I had ever been. She had a gift for connecting with people, for hearing their stories, for making them feel seen. "She's a natural," Maria, the young woman I had mentored, said to me one day. We were at a foundation event, a fundraiser at a hotel in San Francisco, and my mother was working the room, charming donors, telling stories, raising money. I never would have guessed. I watched my mother, at this woman who had spent her life chasing status and approval, who was now chasing meaning and purpose. "She's changed," I said. "We both have." Maria nodded slowly. "That's what happens when you stop running. You start living." I looked at her, at this young woman who had been invisible, who was now a rising star in the tech world, who was using her success to lift others up. "You've changed too," I said. "You're not the scared girl who wrote me that letter." She smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes, the kind of smile that spoke of confidence and purpose. I learned from the best. I hugged her, the way I should have hugged my own sister, all those years ago, when we were both too young and too scared to know how. "I'm proud of you," I said. "I'm so proud of you." Marcus's treatment was complete. He was in remission, the cancer gone, the fight won. He had survived what our father could not. He came to visit me in my office on a sunny afternoon, the city spread out below us, the future waiting to be built. He looked different than I remembered him. Thinner, yes, but also softer. The hard edges that had defined him for so long had been worn down by the illness, by the treatment, by the fear. "I've been thinking," he said, sitting in the chair across from my desk. "About the past. About the future. About what I want to do with the rest of my life." I leaned back in my chair, the sun warm on my face. "What do you want to do?" He was quiet for a moment. I could see him thinking, processing, trying to find the words. "I want to help," he said finally. "I want to do something that matters. I want to use my skills, my experience, my connections to make a difference. I want to be part of the foundation." I looked at him, at this man who had spent his life chasing money and status, who was now, at the end of everything, chasing meaning. "The foundation doesn't need your money, Marcus. It needs your heart." He nodded slowly. "I know. And I'm ready to give it." I reached across the space between us and took his hand. His hand was warm now, steady, the hand of a man who had been given a second chance. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that very much." Chloe was thriving in her role at the hospital. She had been promoted twice, was now a supervisor in the patient registration department, and was being groomed for a management position. She had found her purpose, her passion, her reason for getting up in the morning. She had also found a new partner, a nurse named James who worked in the emergency department, who saw her for who she was, not for who she pretended to be. "He's good for me," she said, over dinner at my apartment. "He doesn't care about my past. He doesn't care about my mistakes. He just cares about me." I looked at my sister, at this woman who had spent her life performing, who was now, at the end of everything, learning to be real. "I'm happy for you," I said. "I'm happy you found someone who sees you." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I found someone who sees me a long time ago. I just didn't know how to see her back." I squeezed her hand, the tears streaming down my face. "I'm here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." We sat there for a long time, sister and sister, holding hands, the silence between us no longer a wall but a bridge. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like we were building something. Not a family. Not a legacy. Something smaller. Something more fragile. Something that might, if we were lucky, become a relationship. David and I had been talking about the future. About marriage, about children, about the life we wanted to build together. He had been patient, so patient, waiting for me to be ready, waiting for me to stop running, waiting for me to see that he wasn't going anywhere. "I'm ready," I said to him one evening, as we sat on the couch in my apartment, the city spread out below us, the stars beginning to appear in the sky. "I'm ready to stop running. I'm ready to start living." He looked at me, his eyes soft, his smile warm. "What took you so long?" I laughed, the kind of laugh that came from deep in my belly, the kind of laugh that spoke of joy and relief and hope. "I'm a slow learner." He pulled me into his arms and held me tight, the way he had held me 1,000 times before, the way he would hold me 1,000 times again. "I love you," he said. "I've always loved you. And I'm not going anywhere." I closed my eyes, the tears streaming down my face, the weight of the years finally lifting. "I love you too," I said. "I've always loved you. I just didn't know how to say it." We sat there for a long time, holding each other, the city spread out below us, the future waiting to be built. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The wedding was small, the way we wanted it. Just family and close friends, gathered in the garden of my mother's house, The same garden where she had planted tulips, the same garden where we had begun to heal. My mother walked me down the aisle, her hand in mine, her eyes wet with tears. Marcus stood beside David as his best man, his face beaming with pride. Chloe was my maid of honor, her smile wide, her heart full. "I now pronounce you wife and husband," the officiant said. "You may kiss the bride." David kissed me, the way he had kissed me 1,000 times before, the way he would kiss me 1,000 times again. And for a moment, the world stopped. There was no hospital, no foundation, no past, no future. There was just us. Two people who had found each other, who had fought for each other, who had finally, after all these years, stopped running. The reception was in the garden, the tables draped in white, the flowers blooming in the spring sun. We ate, we drank, we danced. My mother danced with Marcus, her face soft, her eyes bright. Chloe danced with James, her smile wide, her heart full. David held me in his arms, swaying to the music, the world falling away. "I'm happy," I said, my head on his shoulder. "I'm so happy." He kissed my forehead, his lips soft, his heart steady. "You deserve it. You deserve all of it." I closed my eyes, the tears streaming down my face, the weight of the years finally lifted. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about the hospital that had failed him, the hospital that was now mine. I thought about the work I had done, the lives I had saved, the changes I had made. And I thought about the cost. The toll it had taken on my health, my relationships, my sanity. But I also thought about the gift. The gift of a second chance. The gift of a family that had healed. The gift of a love that had endured. The gift of a life that was finally, after all these years, my own. The reception ended as the sun was setting, the sky streaked with red and gold, the world quiet and still. David and I walked through the garden, hand in hand, the flowers blooming around us, the future waiting to be built. "Where do we go from here?" he asked. I looked at him, at this man who had seen me at my worst and loved me anyway, who had waited for me to stop running, who had believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. "Home," I said. "We go home." The 5th year also brought a moment I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure: the dedication of the new Samuel Chin Center for Equitable Healthcare. It was a building, a physical manifestation of everything we had built over the past 5 years, a place where patients who had been invisible could finally be seen. The center was located on the grounds of St. Catherine's, adjacent to the main hospital, a modern glass and steel structure that seemed to float above the ground. It housed outpatient clinics, community programs, research facilities, and a training center for medical professionals who wanted to learn how to provide equitable care. The dedication ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday in May, the same month my father had died, the same month I had promised to spend the rest of my life fighting for patients like him. The irony was not lost on me. I stood at the window of my office, the city spread out below me, the new center gleaming in the distance, and I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The years of struggle and sacrifice, the moments of despair and the moments of triumph. The people who had helped me along the way, the ones who had seen me when I was invisible, the ones who had believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. My mother came to my office that morning, her face soft, her eyes bright. She was wearing a simple dress, nothing like the designer clothes she had worn when I was a child. She looked, for the first time in as long as I could remember, like a woman who is at peace. "Are you ready?" she asked. I shook my head. I don't know if I'll ever be ready." She walked across the room and took my hand. "Your father would be so proud of you, of all of us, of what we've built." I looked at her, at this woman who had spent her life running from fear, who was now, at the end of everything, learning to be brave. "I hope so," I said. "I hope he's watching." She squeezed my hand. "He is. He's always watching." We walked to the new center together, mother and daughter, the way we should have walked together all those years ago, when I was a girl who needed her mother, and she was a woman who couldn't be there. The path was lined with flowers, the same flowers she had planted in her garden, the same flowers that had bloomed in the spring. The sun was warm on our faces, the sky was clear and blue, the world was alive with possibility. The crowd had gathered in front of the center, hundreds of people, staff and patients and community members and donors and board members. I saw Dr. Okeke, Dr. Okonkwo, Dr. Holloway, the people who had fought beside me, who had resisted me, who had doubted me and supported me and challenged me. I saw Marcus, standing with his new partner, a man named Thomas who had been his nurse during treatment and had become so much more. I saw Chloe, standing with James, her hand in his, her smile wide. I saw Maria, the young woman I had mentored, now a successful tech executive and a board member of the foundation. I saw David, my husband, my partner, my home. And I saw my father. Not in body, but in spirit. In the faces of the patients who had been saved. In the eyes of the staff who had been transformed. In the hope that filled the air like perfume. Harrison Vance, the chairman of the board, stood at the podium and welcomed the crowd. He spoke about the history of the hospital, the challenges we had faced, the transformation we had undergone. He spoke about the vision of equitable care, the commitment to patients regardless of their ability to pay, the belief that healthcare was a right, not a privilege. He spoke about me, about the woman who had led the charge, who had refused to give up, who had fought for what was right even when the odds were against her. Dr. Ariana Chin, he said, is not just the CEO of this hospital. She is the heart of this hospital. She is the reason we are here today. She is the reason that patients who were once invisible are now seen. The crowd applauded, the sound echoing off the glass walls of the new center, filling the air with warmth and gratitude. I stood at the back of the crowd, my mother's hand in mine, the tears streaming down my face. Dr. Chin, Harrison said, would you like to say a few words? I walked to the podium, the weight of the years pressing down on my shoulders, but lighter now. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, at the people who had made this possible, at the people who had believed in the vision and were willing to fight for it. 13 years ago, I said, my father died in this hospital. He died because of a paperwork error, a checkbox that had been left unfilled, an insurance code that didn't match the one on the form. He died because the system failed him. The crowd was silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood pounding in my ears. I made a promise to him as he was dying. I promised that I would spend the rest of my life fighting to make sure that no one else's father died the way he died. I promised that I would change the system. I promised that I would make healthcare equitable for everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. I paused, the tears streaming down my face. I didn't know how I was going to keep that promise. I didn't know if I could. I was just a medical resident, a girl with a dream and a broken heart. But I kept fighting. I kept pushing. I kept believing that change was possible. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, at the people who had helped me keep that promise. I didn't do this alone. None of us did. We did it together. The staff, the board, the donors, the community. We did it because we believed that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. We did it because we believed that every patient deserves to be seen. We did it because we believed that change is possible, even when the odds are against us. I stepped back from the podium, the silence in the crowd absolute. And then the applause started, slowly at first, then building, then overwhelming. I stood at the podium, the tears streaming down my face, and I let myself feel it. The recognition, the acceptance, the love. My mother walked to the podium and put her arm around me. Your father would be so proud, she whispered. I'm so proud. I leaned into her, the way I should have leaned into her all those years ago, when I was a girl who needed her mother, and she was a woman who couldn't be there. Thank you, I said. Thank you for being here. She kissed my cheek, the way she should have kissed me all those years ago. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I promise. The dedication ceremony ended, and the crowd dispersed, moving into the new center for tours and refreshments. I stood outside for a long time, the sun warm on my face, the world alive with possibility. David came and stood beside me, his hand in mine. Are you okay? He asked. I nodded, the tears still streaming down my face. I'm more than okay. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. He put his arm around me and pulled me close. I love you, he said. I've always loved you. I leaned into him, the way I had learned to lean, the way I had learned to trust, the way I had learned to let go. I love you too, I said. I've always loved you. We stood there for a long time, husband and wife, the new center gleaming behind us, the future waiting to be built. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about the hospital that had failed him, the hospital that was now mine. I thought about the work I had done, the lives I had saved, the changes I had made. And I thought about the cost. The toll it had taken on my health, my relationships, my sanity. But I also thought about the gift. The gift of a second chance. The gift of a family that had healed. The gift of a love that had endured. The gift of a life that was finally, after all these years, my own. That evening, we gathered at my mother's house for a family dinner. Marcus and Thomas were there, Chloe and James, my mother and David and me. We sat around the table, the same table where I had eaten breakfast before school, the same table where my father had read the newspaper and my mother had planned her social calendar. But the table was different now. The food was simple, the conversation was easy, the laughter was genuine. I've been thinking, my mother said, as we passed the dishes around the table, about the foundation, about the work we're doing, about the future. We waited. I could see the nervousness in her eyes, the fear of rejection, the hope of acceptance. I want to step down, she said, from the day-to-day operations. I'm not getting any younger. And I want to spend more time with my family. With all of you. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. You've earned it, Mom. You've worked hard. She smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes, the kind of smile that spoke of peace. I have. And I'm proud of what we've built. But it's time for the next generation to take over. She looked at me, her eyes soft, her heart full. I'm passing the torch to you, Ariana. Not because you need it, but because you deserve it. I looked at her, at this woman who had spent her life running from fear, who was now, at the end of everything, learning to let go. I don't know what to say, I said. She squeezed my hand. Say you'll accept. Say you'll carry on the work. Say you'll make your father proud. I looked around the table, at the faces of my family, at the people who had been strangers and were now, finally, after all these years, becoming something more. I accept, I said. I'll carry on the work. I'll make him proud. The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing off the walls, filling the space with warmth and gratitude. I sat at the head of the table, the tears streaming down my face, and I let myself feel it. The recognition. The acceptance. The love. After dinner, I walked through the garden, the same garden where my mother had planted tulips, the same garden where we had begun to heal. The sun was setting, the sky streaked with red and gold, the world quiet and still. I stopped at the bench where my father used to sit, the bench where he had read the newspaper and watched me play. I sat down, the weight of the years pressing down on me, but lighter now. I thought about my father, about the man who had believed in me, about the treatment that had been denied. I thought about the hospital that had failed him, the hospital that was now mine. I thought about the work I had done, the lives I had saved, the changes I had made. And I thought about the promise I had made, as he was dying, that I would spend the rest of my life fighting to make sure that no one else's father died the way he had died. I had kept that promise. I had fought. I had pushed. I had changed. And now I was ready to rest. Not to stop fighting, there was always more to fight for. But to rest in the knowledge that I had done enough. That I had been enough. That my father would be proud. David came and sat beside me, his hand in mine. What are you thinking about? He asked. I leaned my head on his shoulder, the way I had learned to lean, the way I had learned to trust, the way I had learned to let go. I'm thinking about my father, I said. About the promise I made. About whether I kept it. He kissed my forehead, his lips soft, his heart steady. You kept it, he said. You kept it 1,000 times over. I closed my eyes, the tears streaming down my face, the weight of the years finally lifting. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the years of struggle and sacrifice, the moments of despair and the moments of triumph. I thought about the people who had helped me along the way, the ones who had seen me when I was invisible, the ones who had believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And I thought about the woman I had become. A woman who was not defined by what had been taken from her, but by what she had chosen to build with what remained. A woman who had learned to forgive, not because it was deserved, but because she needed to be free. A woman who had found her voice, her purpose, her home. I opened my eyes. The sun had set, the stars were appearing in the sky, the world was quiet and still. David was beside me, his hand in mine, his heart steady. My family was inside, laughing and talking and being together. The hospital was standing, the foundation was thriving, the work was continuing. And I was exactly where I was supposed to be. This story is not just about revenge. It is about truth, pain, and rising stronger than before. If this hit your heart, then you know what to do. Like the video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more real stories that burn like fire. Until next time, stay sharp, stay loud, stay rebel.